Well, we've done this episode 53 times already, but I feel like this is the time that we're actually going to get it right. Tonight, double your pleasure, double your fun. We have 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery to talk about. Star Trek Weekly starts now!
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin!
Oh, did you ever expect that we would start Star Trek Weekly with the Bee Gees? Well, maybe you should have. Welcome to Star Trek Weekly. I'm Christian Bladt at Christian DMZ. For those watching on YouTube, to my left, camera right, Kari Lane. Where can people find you?
Hey, how's it going? You guys can find me online at Kari D Lane. That's Karidlane.
And Frank, where can people find you?
At Happy Go Jackie.
Thank you.
That's right.
I should have just said it.
That's right.
By request, we are going to cover 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery tonight. I guess the request isn't so much that we cover 2, but so that we catch up because people want to immediately talk about the new episode. So, we will talk about tonight's episode, but first we have to talk about episode 6. And, by the way, Steve, when you can, if you can put the chat up so we can see if anybody's joining in with us. And the Staying Alive actually refers to the 2nd episode. Yeah. So I'm going to just have to ignore it and not comment on it. The first episode, episode 6, is Lethe. Do we want to guess on that? Lethe?
Yeah, Lethe?
Yeah.
Sure.
And I had to look it up. It's a river in Hades whose waters cause drinkers to forget their past. I think that's probably the definition that they were going for. It also means oblivion and forgetfulness, so also appropriate. So I was really glad. Thanks, dictionary.com. I wish they were a sponsor, but if they'd like to be, please contact someone over here. Anyway, overall, I found this to be an interesting episode, a kind of Sarek-heavy episode, even though he was unconscious through most of it. I will first, though, ask Kari what you thought of this episode.
I really enjoyed it. I think these episodes are getting more and more exciting and like intricate and interesting because before you're kind of like, okay, or it's just, there's not as much at stake. So finally it's like, yes, something a little more engaging, and I like the reveal when we finally get to it of like why it's that memory.
Right, exactly. And we'll, of course, go into the particulars. Uh-oh, I have to move to my right. Anyway, and Frank, your thoughts about episode 6?
I always find it's interesting with Vulcans because more often than not, it is about how close can you get them to showing human-like emotions, and just that like how close can you get the Vulcan to kind of ride that line? Certainly, much more prevalent with Spock since he's half human.
Yeah,
yes,
of course.
but still trying to put Sarek in those kind of situations to have him kind of having human-like tendencies.
And he will not budge. Not Sarek. Not enough anyway. Well, let's sort of go through the episode. I think that in this episode, and also the second one that we'll discuss, the increasing closeness of Burnham and Tilly, I'm enjoying that dynamic. I like that. I'm going to call them pals. I like watching them be pals. Gal pals, perhaps. They're
BFFs.
You know what they are. And but we also get Lieutenant Nash Tyler really becomes the head of security in this episode. And we talked last week that do we trust him? Well, I still don't know, but I feel a little bit better about him, I guess.
He seems more trustworthy now.
He seems more trustworthy, but that could always change. So one of the earliest things that we see is Sarek in the episode about to go on the diplomatic mission, and this interesting concept is introduced: the sort of this separatist rebel element of Vulcans who, I guess, give into emotion to stop the spread of emotion. So I hope that irony is not lost on them.
Well, although it seems like it's more like extreme logic that they say. They kind of just play something out to its nihilistic endpoint. It's like, logically, that's where it's going. Just
like something that they would say to themselves to justify their actions. But I don't know, I found it to be a very interesting concept. I mean, the sort of thing that we certainly wouldn't have gotten in the original series, I mean, just it's such a complex idea because the Vulcans were They were a little bit more two-dimensional in that respect, I think, for a long time. I mean, Spock, as you mentioned, being half human, he was always much more of a wild card than the actual standard Vulcan. So I found it to be a sort of very interesting thing. What were you going to say?
Because I mean, their big thing is IDIC as well too. That whole infinite diversity, infinite combination. So it's interesting to see a faction of Vulcans that kind of shun that kind of open door policy.
I like the weapon they used to kill himself, though. The bad guy.
Yeah.
That was kind of a cool bomb thing.
Yeah.
Very reminiscent of the Voyager when they're, I can't remember the villain that they would fight for the first season, where they kind of inject themselves to become an explosive.
I wish I could remember. You think between the two of us, one of us would remember.
I know.
But no.
But I thought about that when that guy was doing.
Anyone in the chat who would like to let us know. And Alistair Allen says, the logic extremist suicide bombing is the logical conclusion of, quote, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. I don't know that they would throw that around, but he's absolutely right. The logic extremists. Let's talk sort of a little bit more about the Sarek storyline. So we get to see this weird mind meld again between Sarek and Burnham. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it is, they at least explain it a lot better. It goes back to an incident that happened when she was younger, and there was a bombing. And he basically saved her life. And they only touch on the fact that apparently this kind of meld was able to bring her back to life. She said I was dead for 3 minutes. Let's delve into that a little bit, but also the fact that how we see it, the visual was actually really cool, that all of a sudden, like, Burnham's like running and jumping. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And then all of a sudden she's on Vulcan. Kari, you first. Your thoughts about sort of watching visually seeing this connection between Burnham and Sarek?
I thought it was super cool. I did like the representation of her traveling there, and I did, how you were saying, I really liked how the scientists were kind of talking about it, like, yeah, I've heard about it, but it's only kind of like myth and legend, like, I didn't know this was actually real. And so how they break it down, it is a logical, okay, that kind of makes sense of, like, how you guys are connected, and, I thought that was nice that they brought it up that way without it sounding too like exposition of how this works. You're just like, oh, okay, this is very intriguing of, oh, okay.
And they explain that the closeness is because of Sarek's Katra, which is like his soul. I mean, that's sort of, another, it's not just a mind meld like Spock and Bones from Star Trek 2 as seen in Star Trek 3. So your thoughts, Frank, about sort of how they explained that, and also how it was to view the visual representation of it.
It was a cool visual representation, and then it basically, when you come back and revisit it constantly again and again, and kind of jumping back a little bit previous to kind of see how she relates with Amanda as well. Thought it was cool to be able to go back that at different points in that sort of memory to kind of pick up different details.
Also how Michael adds that, like, yeah, it doesn't happen that often, but it can. And, like, that was also kind of a nice tidbit of, like, okay, this is maybe why you also don't know that much about it, because it's very rare. And
yeah, and, I mean, we really get to the root of Burnham and Sarek's relationship. She sees this as how disappointed Sarek is in her, and as we ultimately find out, he is actually more disappointed in himself because he had to basically make a Sophie's choice. Like, well, do you want your fake kid to get in, or do you want your real kid to get in? And so he chose Spock, and then, of course, ultimately, as Sarek mentions, and it sort of pains him that Spock chose to go join Starfleet, so he might as well not have left the door open for Spock. And I think it bothers him, but we don't see emotion attached to it because he hasn't really sort of given in on that. He's still very logical about the whole thing. Or, Kari, did you feel like we saw a little bit?
Yeah, I felt the actor did a good enough job that, like, within the eyes of, like, you're making me pick between my two children, though he doesn't quite say that, but that's what he means. And I like that moment, even though it was so subtle, but it was enough that the other one's like, yeah, I can tell you're being very emotional right now. So, no, the range is not as high as a human, but it's enough that you could see it hurt to make that choice.
But logic would dictate you prefer your actual offspring.
Well, even more than that, though, is it's the one who's actually half Vulcan, not even, because then that would be a reflection of your experiment, too. Because if he chose the human, that would be like, I fully believe my experiment was a success. And so in choosing not, it's also it's also a reflection on how he doesn't believe his own product didn't work,
Frank, what do you think about that situation that Sarek was in, and I mean, and the fact that he had to kind of live with it all this time?
Yeah, it was interesting, and I mean, it's also just the Vulcans' point of view of that. Certainly for their reasoning was that, all right, you can put one, but then you also have a son, and when he gets old enough and he enrolls two, then all of a sudden we have two that are pure Vulcan in this academy, and so they're worrying that all of a sudden it's going to be
pure.
Yes, so they're going to be skewing. So then I also think like, well, but there's nobody really else on Vulcan in that same situation as Sarek is.
Yeah.
With two kind of, so it's like Vulcans, you can relax. It's not going to change everything. It's two in this big, huge body. It's not going to be a big tipping point.
And it was interesting that we saw sort of a very emotional Sarek sort of as inside of the mind meld aspect of it. So it's not really him, but we see that part does exist in him, the way that he sort of violently kicked Burnham out of the memory, like, this is mine, I don't want you in here. That's how much he didn't want her to know this. And ultimately he had to let her know so that she could help find him.
But I also think at the end, too, when he's in sickbay, and she wants to talk to him about this, and he just says, well, we aren't related. I feel like that is him just trying to be as hurtful as possible in that moment, just to try to just get her to leave.
That's almost more emotional. Of like, I'm going to say an emotional thing, and not even we're not related. It's like, okay. But you're not biologically related, but you are related. You live together, and you essentially raised her, so you are.
No, I think that sort of the interpersonal relationship in that storyline was very interesting. Let's move on to one of our other stories, though. Actually, let's backtrack, because I like the idea that Tilly was in serious training because she really wants to be a captain. And honestly, if there's anybody that's going to help you get through that, it's somebody like Burnham, who's practically a Vulcan. Like, this is what you need to do. And I like that Burnham's experience helped her be like, you know what, you kind of like, you do you got to figure it out for yourself. But
dorky criticism, though, I really didn't like how Burnham ran in the hallway. It was a weird like bounce run thing. I'm like, what is that about? It looks so awkward. Did it look weird to you guys?
It didn't look weird to me, but I can
understand that.
No circumstance. Well, no,
because Tilly looked fine, but Burnham had this like, I'm a rabbit and a bounce, and
that's how you do it on Vulcan.
Right, exactly.
Maybe
the gravity's
I could
different.
go with that. Sure,
yeah, you have to worry about that. So I think that's interesting. Again, that ties into them building. But the actual storyline that I wanted to get both of your thoughts on is we see Admiral Cornwell comes for a surprise visit to see Lorca, and again, we talk about how this is the time period before the original series where things were a little bit freer than maybe in the Next Generation times. And you know what? If a captain wants to get it on with an admiral, more power to you, I
was kind of excited for their little hookup thing.
I mean, I thought it was probably, two people that have very few people that they can relate to.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's history. And it was just like, oh, this war's going on.
Yep.
You know what? Let's do this.
I can think of better things to spend the time.
And the fact that... I don't know. I liked that part of the story. I thought it was good that, he actually has somebody that he can talk to. To the way it played out, Admiral Cornwell might be correct in that maybe he was just doing it to kind of distract her, I don't necessarily think that, but I can see where she came from.
You don't think so?
Well, I think I wouldn't put it past him, but I certainly didn't feel it at the time.
Yeah.
There is something that I think he might have wanted to have happen, but let's talk about this part first.
Maybe like a fraction of it was there, but no, it felt genuine. Like they felt like they've had a chemistry already that I was like, sure, and again, like you were saying, like they relate to each other. Makes sense.
No, but that's, I mean, you certainly given their chemistry, but then you also know how to push somebody's buttons to get them off talking about what they've come to talk about. It's easy to kind of distract them with something else. Like, let's do this instead.
Maybe it's like a 90-10.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like,
I mean, that doesn't mean
okay, but I think you're probably right that it is a small percentage. I think you've both convinced me that there was something to it, but he wouldn't have done it if it wasn't somebody that he at least had something, he wanted it in some way. He was like, well, this is going to be a great time to put on the old Lorca charm, and... I thought that it was very interesting. Obviously, she was very concerned for him. And then, of course, the moment where, morning after, he freaks out. And who hasn't had that happen the morning after where somebody puts a phaser in your face when you wake them up unexpectedly?
And choke them, too.
Well, yeah, I've left that part out because that's obvious. But, and so obviously she feels like, you know what, you're not in a good place to be a starship captain. And I can't say I disagree with her. And, you know, the whole like, okay, well, we're going to have to plan for you to, you know, get out of the captain's chair. But conveniently, I have to go fill in for Sarek on this Vulcan ship. Whoops, I'm kidnapped. Now,
well, that wasn't so convenient. I mean, he basically set her up.
That's what my question was going to be for both of you. Do you think he thought like, well, you know who should go is the only person who doesn't want me to be a captain?
Absolutely.
I think in his self-defense mode, yeah.
Okay, but
because like,
because he doesn't want. That's all he's got is the captain's chair.
He's off kilter a little bit, but depending on what he's gone through, like having a weapon by your bed, we've seen that before in other things. Like somebody is like, you have to be ready to defend yourself. So I don't think that's totally bizarre, but it was.
No, I mean he is a you know, he is an officer. He's a military man. He's at war. You know, but the fact that his guard couldn't even be let down with, you know, a lover.
Well, it's almost like a PTSD trigger.
Yeah.
It was just something because she was touching a specific scar.
Yeah.
And that made him freak out, which I'm like. But yes, I do think it was slightly intentional of like, and go. But
it was not slightly intentional. That was,
as you say, Frank, I feel like you're like, it was like as soon as like, well, Sarek can't go. Okay, I got this. You know,
absolutely.
It's like 2 birds, 1 stone. No, not surprising that she's kidnapped. Convenient, though, for storytelling that they didn't kill her, because I think it's more interesting story-wise. Because if they kill her, then he's like, okay, well, that's not what I thought. So now he doesn't have the guilt of sending her to her death yet.
No, and it exists still as a ticking bomb out there. Does she get rescued? And if she does Lorca help in that rescue to kind of throw, like, not make her want to get rid of him?
Yeah, and by rescuing her, does he prove that, you know what, obviously you are suited for that, but I've got my eye on you in season 2. Which, by the way, I think has been announced since last episode.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it's definitely announced that there'll be a season 2, but I think that happened since last Sunday.
I think it's 2019. Like it's, which is almost 2018, so it's one of those like, yeah,
that's true. 2019 is not so far away.
But it just sounds so far.
No, it definitely does.
But then, again, that's like, so what are you going to do with CBS All Access? You've got this in the Good Fight, and this is going away for, you know, almost a year?
Reruns of Young Sheldon. Obviously.
Hooray.
All right, I've answered that for you now, Frank. We can move on.
Yeah, that's true.
what it's worth having CBS All Access for.
Real quick in the chat, Alsdare Alan, sorry if I said that wrong. The idea that Cornwell wouldn't file a log before heading into enemy territory and including the conclusion about Lorca is somewhat of a stretch. Too much of a stretch, really. That's a very good point.
It's a very good point, but they had very little time to work with. You know, it was a small
sound like
window.
They went right away.
And she did have to go. It's a valid point. We're not discounting that. I do think that in this situation, the writers explained it because they're like, no, she's got to go right away, because I'm sure that issue came up in the writers' room, and they're like, well, here's how she doesn't have time to do that. Yeah. You know, and here's how Lorca made sure. It's like, you got to go now. No,
that window is closing.
You can go to the bathroom on the shuttle, okay? You go. So yeah, I think that you know, once Lorca took the initiative to get his little problem to go away.
Well, and especially when they say, "Are we going after her?" and it's like, "No, we don't want to get the Discovery in Klingon hands. Let's make sure we get authorization first." Like,
that was a interesting moment, because even
dark,
Saru was like, I just know that usually you charge right into these kind of rescue missions, and of course it's not protocol, but you're not someone who follows protocol.
Devil's advocate, is he doing it because he got scolded so hard from what she was saying before that he's like, well, fine, I'm gonna do it?
No, he just doesn't want to rescue her.
That's true.
Yeah. No, we appreciate devil's advocate. That's well worth it. Well, before we move on to the next episode, we should point out that this is our Halloween episode, and I've continued to only wear 2 shirts on this show. This and the Star Trek t-shirt. But I felt like I needed to wear it because it was Halloween.
Yeah.
And Kari, I'm so sorry. I have no idea what your costume is.
No, actually, I'll tell you after. So well, people live, and we did this on my last episode of the show.
Did people figure it out in the other show?
In the chat room they did, yeah.
Okay.
So if you guys are watching this live, comment in the chat. And then if you're watching this later, comment down below. So this is a little bit more of the costume. And then I'll just take my headphones off so you can see the hair. So there's like little hair buns. That's part of the hairstyle of this character. It's live action, and the genre is sci-fi.
Atomic Blonde.
When you found out what it was, Frank, did you go, oh, I should have known that? Or...
She's never told me what it is.
Oh, you still don't know?
But I do know what it is.
You do know what it is. Okay.
Here at the studio, I actually 2 people instantly know, and everybody else I had to lead them there.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. A good job in the chat room for Luna Malfoy.
You know, it's
Don't
so
say
funny
it, but
because
you got
but the next thing out of my mouth was going to be, if it's that thing, I have no idea because I
Oh,
I
you've
didn't
never?
watch it. No,
Okay.
it's I've been meaning to watch it for
It's on
so
your
long
to-do list?
that I was loaned like a DVD set that I still have. So it's not even like, oh, it's on my
Nice.
Netflix queue. No, I have physical DVDs of this thing
Yeah.
to watch, and I haven't. But anyway,
Before we jump to
yes.
one thing, and
Yeah.
it's even a bit in the second episode we're going to talk about the food replicator, the food replicator.
Oh,
Just
that
it's-
was weird and funny.
that it like explains the
Here's the
nutrition
health
level.
benefits.
Yeah. I was
Green
like,
tea and antioxidants.
so I want to know what it says if somebody like replicates a Twinkie or some equivalent junk
You're a
food.
fat ass.
Yeah, it's like
This is
are you-
bad
are-
for you.
Are you know what? I've decided to make you a banana instead. You know, or it's like, are you sure you need that? A double cheeseburger? How about just a single? You know, and does it judge you in your food decisions?
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting because we've never seen that before.
I feel like, is that something in the future that they decided to phase out? Like,
'Cause it's
no.
annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys lose that
Yeah,
part.
because Kirk doesn't want that.
No.
You know, so he's like, yank out that part from the food lubricant. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I had that thought when I was watching it. I'm like, well, this is a little irritating.
It was a good use of comedy though too. Like after the workout, like this is what I want to eat. No, you shouldn't eat that. You should eat this. Like that was actually a something that's so minuscule, not really that important, but it was funny.
It is funny, and I appreciate the comedic foil of it. We'll just see how they explain it away. Like everything, it's like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't go forward, and let's find out why. So now, for everybody who was like, oh, could you please start doing the new episodes? We're going to talk about the new episode. We're going to talk about tonight's episode.
Yay!
You asked for it. You demanded
And
it.
now what I'm going to be afraid of is people in the chat are like, oh, no, wait, I haven't watched it yet. So that means they have to stop watching and hopefully come back to this at some point. And we'll indeed watch our representation of Episode 7, review of Episode 7, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. And I will start off by saying that typically, and you've seen this in a lot of sci-fi, I hate anything with a time loop where we see the same stuff happen again and again. And this one did a fairly good job, probably because they know, okay, we've seen time loop stuff. And they definitely move it along and they mix it up enough. I still hate seeing the same things that many times in the course of a show. It's just like you're wasting my time.
You
But
know
I get
what,
it. You
though?
need to do it for the story. But
Something interesting, I don't know if either of you, let me know if you thought of this when you were watching it. So it was interesting even though they did some things over, there were different variables. And I feel that's kind of like in our day-to-day lives. We're still us, but maybe you have like 5 different options on something and then you went with this one instead of that one. And so that was kind of
yeah,
cool
there's
to see
different
that change it
variations
up.
that lead to Nash saying "Saved by the Bell." You know what I mean? So it's like you still hit kind of the same important points.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the concept of sort of fixed things happen in this loop, but you do get there some different ways. I did find the whole concept to be kind of interesting, Frank.
Yeah, it was. I mean, because Star Trek has done this thing being caught in a temporal loop many a time, and at least this one was kind of interesting, where you've got the inclusion of Mudd as somebody that he is the driving force of this. He remembers every iteration of the loop, so because he's looking for something specifically.
And someone else does too.
True, that you find out.
Yeah, which is very interesting because in Episode 6 we see some. We see the fact that Lieutenant Guy from Ren, whose name is really Lieutenant Stamets, but I like that we call him Lieutenant Guy from Ren.
Absence of color on his hair person, because every time I look at him I'm like, there's
Lieutenant
it's
Albino
so-
from Ren.
pretty much. He has like his hair and his eyelashes, it's just
But
so
we
blonde
saw his
out.
personality was
Yes.
different in the previous episode, and then even before the loop starts in this one, there's a lot of like, you're so tall, just like really weird, inappropriate stuff.
There's no filter
There's
now.
definitely something brewing, and
Yeah.
I expect that we'll see that come
but
to a
I'm-
head over the next 2 weeks.
I'm trying to think if it's necessarily bad though. It's just somebody being
Well,
open up to a wider universe.
Is this
Considering-
like Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, and his bad personality was the one we see in the mirror, because that one looks so menacing and out at him like grrr. And now this one's like way more like fun.
It didn't look like that menacing. It was
No,
just
it
staring.
did. It looked
was
down
just-
and was like mwahaha face.
No, it did
Yeah,
not. It was
huh?
just staring at. It was
We
just
had
like
people even
his.
So-
comment in the chat, be like, "You guys didn't mention that thing," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"It was. It
well,
looked
that
scary."
was so that episode where he first basically
Yeah.
hooks himself up to the spore drive. At the end of that episode, it was a little bit of a sinister look. Since then, it's been more like goofy and silly. But I did think that in that first episode. And here's the thing: it's definitely not a bad thing, because without that, eventually Mudd would have figured all of this out and been able to do it. So they were able to best him. But let's talk a little bit about the episode kind of in order. And I did like the fact that we were seeing sort of a continuation of, for lack of a better word, the Tyler and Burnham like flirting even before we see it really intensify over the loop. You see that early. I'm like, okay, good. They're going to continue that story, and the simple fact that she's not really well equipped to deal with emotions, especially not a very powerful emotion like love.
Even regular humans have difficulty with that too. So that's why it's even more for her.
And I thought it was interesting too, because you thought like, oh, well, she's been with Captain Giorgio for 7 years. She's had time to acclimate. But then her explanation of where she entered in the command rank, she was also overseeing other people, and that really wasn't.
She really couldn't fraternize with anyone except for probably Captain Giorgio, so she wouldn't go to parties, which I thought, was a good explanation. But the episode starts, we're actually getting Burnham's personal log as she refers to how Tilly's a friend. So even she's admitting that this is her friend, and I like to see that. They're winning the war. That, I think, is something that is very important from that. And, and the sort of this closeness with Burnham and Tyler. And, just random things about Tilly. I used to go for soldiers, but now I'm in a musician phase. Just things, I don't know. I like her a lot, and I know she's really starting to rub people the wrong way, or at least she did initially.
No.
And I think that this sort of quirky presence helps, especially with such a serious person like Burnham,
She's rubbing me less now than she was initially.
I think the first episode, yeah. But I like her more every episode, for sure.
That's a fun thought. Luna in the chat said, he's using mushrooms, and they all know that, so I think they must just believe he's high off the sport.
Magic mushrooms. That's actually a great point. I was not thinking like that.
Because Alzazar Allen was saying his partner is, the doctor seems remarkably easy about the complete personality change and weird behavior. I'm like, I wouldn't say he's at ease. He knows something's off, and he knows he's been different.
He's trying to help him as much as possible. I think you're right. He's going with it. He's very cautious, I think. Yeah. The doctor, whose name we really don't know. Yeah. Which, at some point probably need to know these things. But that's neither here nor there. I sort of loved the concept of the Gormagander, which they say is a giant space whale, but I thought of it as a giant panda at first, because they talk about how they're too lazy to mate. And that's why, especially in zoos, that's why they run into a problem that pandas just don't procreate. So I thought it was kind of cool, giant space whale. Made me think of Star Trek 4. So I thought that that was kind of an interesting way in for Harry Mudd. I have to apologize, because last week I called him Harvey Mudd several times, and I'm going to chalk that up to the cross-country flight that I was on that afternoon with a 2-year-old, which meant I did not nap. But most people didn't catch it, but the couple that did read me a little bit of riot act. I'm calling him Harvey Mudd. His name is Harry Mudd. But I did call him Harcourt Fenton Mudd. I got the full name right, but not his nickname. But anyway, I'm glad I was able to rectify that mistake only a week later. And I was glad to see him again. Surprised to see him so quickly. I knew from the preview from last week that he was going to be on this one. But I was surprised that we got him only 2 weeks later. I thought that might have been later in the season, but, that was cool.
Keep it fresh that you're like, oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah, and so I like the idea that we get to see Mudd again. I think it's kind of ingenious that he is able to, just keep trying again, and he can just really keep at it. Raises some questions of do you start the loop over again and you're rejuvenated, or you remember everything? So wouldn't you get tired doing it 50 some odd times in a row? Well, and he seems annoyed, but he doesn't seem exhausted where, all right, this loop I'm sleeping. I'm going to just sleep for 30 minutes.
Each one's a half hour.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious, so I was doing the math, and he's probably been doing this for at least a solid day, over 24, almost 30 hours straight. Well, he said
that he killed Lorca 53 times.
Well, if it's 53, then times 30, and then you're almost at 30 hours.
Yeah. So it's, he's probably spent 2 days on it. Yeah. And yes, it's a little bit nitpicky, but it was just more out of curiosity. Yeah. I'm not faulting the show for this. I just wonder, at some point,
he'd be tired.
Yeah, but maybe that's not the way that Harvey. Just kidding. That's not the way Harry Mudd lives his life.
Maybe in the reset, he is at the state that he was when he started it.
I don't know.
Only his brain remembers, not muscle memory.
Yeah. Frank, your thoughts about having Harry Mudd come back so quickly and his plan?
It was, we could say it's an interesting plan. I mean, it definitely is like the long con to do something like this, use this sort of device. But it also, his explanation of escaping the Klingon prison that he was in, it's like, well, I don't know, like, certainly he could have left at any time that he wanted to then, because it didn't seem that hard to
Well, I don't
up.
think he had the crystals on his person when he was on the Klingon ship.
No, but I guess it was his bug buddy that helped him out and then
Right.
took off. So it's like that bug buddy's always been with him.
Yeah.
So what only
Why
I
didn't
guess
they do it
the
earlier?
fuel of vengeance against Lorca was
Right,
like enough
and
to make him go.
I did like that they referenced that he used to brag about how he had robbed a Betazoid bank, which of course would have been very difficult, but he was able to do that because just trial and error. Eventually, you're going to figure it out. So, yeah, I think it was, I don't know, it was cool that they had already established Stamets outside of the time. Sorry, Lieutenant Guy from Rent, outside of the time loop, and that I guess the second time we see events, it had already happened 15, 20 times. It had happened a lot. So that's good. I don't...
Just skip ahead.
The worst part of why I usually don't like these repeating loops is that we see the second time when no one remembers anything yet. Usually you'll get like one person, or in the Next Generation episode, like there's like a weird series of numbers that Data knows to recognize or something, and he knows who to trust over Riker or Picard, and he explains it at least. Like, all right, so that's what was different. But you still see the same thing so many times. And
someone mentioned Dark Matter does it really well. They have a time loop episode as well.
Oh, and I'm aware of Dark Matter, but it's next to the DVDs of whatever that thing is that I'm not going to say what it is.
I haven't gotten that far in it yet.
Yeah.
Or they speed up later where they do the montage of like, do you know how many times I've killed you? And so that's a fun like...
I was actually going to mention that next, that's probably my favorite just visually part of the episode is just him walking through different doors, Mudd walking through different doors and just shooting Lorca at different situations. And then, it's like, oh, and I have this gun. Let's see how this works. I thought that was kind of interesting. Sorry to see Lorca get killed that many times, though. It's not something I was looking for, but they at least made light of it. And the line that they had, you were mad? No, I'm Mudd. It wasn't great, but it made me laugh. So I guess that's all that really matters. And so that was the loop with, that's where we got the number 53 times. And we really do see sort of where this relationship between Burnham and Lieutenant Nash could play out. And that is not where the timeline continues. So only Stamets really knows that, they danced and they kissed and all that. But, you can kind of see. But the way the episode ends, it's really not that far along. It's more like we know where it could go, but it might never go there because who knows what happens over the next few weeks. So it is kind of fun to see them play with time in that way.
Well, I felt like this episode and the one prior that we were talking about, I felt like you get to see a lot more character development in many different characters, which was nice to see because it's been so Burnham focused for so long.
And I mean, both episodes, Burnham is really heavily factored in. I mean, if you think about it, other than the montage where he dies, Lorca's barely in this episode. If it's anyone's episode, it's Lieutenant Stamets, Lieutenant Guy from Rent. It's mostly his episode because he, continually has to all right, you're going to have to believe me this time. And I thought it was interesting that he figured out, tell me something that you would never have told anyone, that definitely. And he's like, so you've never been in love, and conveniently enough, that ties into that storyline too. So it kind of brings it all together.
But even like Burnham's reaction in episode 6 at the end, where she reintroduces herself.
Yeah.
Just like the first time you actually see like a really warm, just friendly smile. Like that's the first time you've seen Burnham just kind of really kind of show that sort of exterior, a kind of scion of emotion. So it was kind of nice having that, and then jumping into where we follow her throughout this episode.
Well, it's great too because like it is true that they did shake hands before, but they didn't get to finish that because then she essentially freaks out. Yeah,
she totally freaked out because Sarek was talking to her. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say sorry. Their relationship development was super adorable to watch, and I like how he kind of points out her awkwardness. Of he's like, all right, well, guess you don't want to talk about that, and she's kind of like, wait, but to his point of view, that's what it is. So it's nice that he calls her out on it. So I think that is what would push her over to be like, no, that's incorrect, and want to correct him on it.
So what I do find interesting, sort of a very selfless act, even though Burnham feels like she'll probably get a do-over, is she points out to Mudd that I'm worth way more than this ship is because I killed the Messiah, you know. So I thought that, you know, obviously, rightly so, that got his attention, and he's like, oh, yeah, you're right. So they're able to kind of utilize that during future loops that were still yet to come. Speaking of, I guess there's a show Dark Matter that you referenced, but there's these dark matter crystals that, again, is kind of a cool, interesting way to see people die that looks like it's excruciating. And unfortunately, that's one of the ways we saw Lorca die. We see Nash die that way, and Burnham eats one, which... That's probably the worst way to go with that because it's
she went pretty quick though.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It hurts, but at least you go fast.
That's actually what it says on the package for the dark matter crystals.
Yeah.
What did you both think sort of this? What this tells us about Burnham? You know, someone who has been convicted and imprisoned for mutiny, but at the same time, you know, she's still willing to give herself up for this crew and the ship. Even though she felt like she wasn't going to have to follow through on it. But she still knew it was a possibility, so she was willing to do it. Kari,
well, she was especially doing it because the guy she likes died.
Yeah.
Because she's like,
true.
I can't do this one because he died, which I'm like, I'm blanking. I'll probably think of it later. I just saw that on something else where they're like, I
Happy
can't.
Death Day.
Oh, thank you. That's one of the ones, too. She's like, I have to do it over because somebody I cared about died. So
yeah.
That's very similar concept of it makes sense. And I thought it was nice and noble of her of like, well, I like this guy. And then she's like, we need to change this up again. And she doesn't want it to keep going from that point on. So she's like, well, I'm going to come right back anyways.
No, I don't know. I feel like it's selfless on her part. Did you feel that way, Frank, that it tells us that she's still the person she was up until that moment when she knocked out Captain Georgiou and the pilot and decided to start a war?
Yeah, it's no, I would agree. I mean, she was definitely putting other people before herself, for sure. It's yeah, I mean, other than just actually being officially, at least in the context of the Discovery, other than being given an official rank, I mean, she is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, after episode 6, like a functioning member of this crew.
Yeah,
apart from having rank,
yeah,
she's a science advisor,
Science specialist,
and she's going to have a spot on the bridge. Is something that we didn't touch on that because we dove right into the next episode. So she actually has a position on the bridge now, but wasn't important enough for Mudd to realize who she was and why she was so valuable. And so that definitely, you know, and it probably helps that he was so deep into having done all of those loops that any new variable probably excited him so much because he's like, oh my god, great, I can move this along. So that probably worked. Luna says, when Burnham swallows the dark matter, I was in shock and it was one of the most badass things I've ever seen. It was pretty badass, but she knew also, you're right, that her man was killed. But
she also didn't like yell or scream too.
Yeah,
Somebody
that's
else
true.
who had it like did make noise, and she just held that composure. Just like, all right.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I thought that was I don't know. I found the visuals of that to be kind of cool.
Yeah.
But then also, it really told us a lot about her. There was in one of the earlier time loops, Mudd said something that was funny. He was telling everyone on the bridge that none of you should consider being a hero, including you, random communications officer man.
I did love that.
I thought that was very
line.
funny because obviously he knew that guy was going to be the one to do it, so he just turns and he's like, including you.
Well, as us an audience, I'm like, who is that guy?
Yeah, well, and I think as anyone who's ever seen Star Trek knows that usually that guy does do it and he gets killed right away. And I like that he's just like, just stop, all right? Like, no one knows who you are. You know, you're not making any friends.
Yeah.
And at some point, you know, Mudd realizes that Stamets has been cheating and passing notes in class, which I thought was interesting. I was a little surprised at the point in which he stepped up and said, so the drive only works with me, but I guess he was maybe a couple moves ahead of Mudd and thought that this was the time to finally let him know. And interesting that that wasn't written anywhere in anything, in any logs, anything that he went through. So they were able to pull that off. But ultimately, they do outsmart old Harry Mudd. And I thought it was kind of fun to actually see Stella and her father, who, as it turns out, had been looking for him. And so he was not searching for Stella. He was actually running away because he had taken her dowry, but not married her. And so her father was really focused on the fact that we need to make an honest woman out of Stella.
And huge shout out to Officer Hot, who played Stella. She's from Winona Earp.
Oh, well, look at that.
Yeah, so that's
Her name's-
Kat. Well,
Her name's not Officer Hot, though.
Her last name
Her
is
legal
Hot,
name.
and so she's a sheriff or
Wow.
deputy, so she's Officer Hot.
Look at that.
Nicole Hot. There we go. And then the actress's name is Kat, and I want to say it's Burrell. It's Barrell. But yeah, she's on Winona Earp, and I saw an Earper posting on Twitter a photo of her, and I'm like, okay.
Well,
and
yeah.
then I saw her, and I'm like, oh, there she's on
There
this
she
episode.
is.
Now I get the connection. But she's great on Winona Earp, and I thought she was adorable in this. Being like, no, you're not leaving.
You're not, yeah, and I thought that was kind of a nice touch, especially to the continuation. Oddly enough, the beginning of this character's storyline will be his continuation of his storyline in the original series, which is, yeah, you're never going to leave her side. And they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. And so, Frank, what did you think about, one, how they were able to use that information against him, and just the fact that we do actually see Stella interact with Harry Mudd in this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like one of those where, I mean, I suppose like if you equated to like if they did a prequel of Frasier, and you get to see Niles with Mavis, and you get to see Mavis, like a young version of Mavis,
Right.
come out for the first time, like, oh, all right,
There she is, yeah.
yeah. So there, and it's like, oh, all right, I guess it's nice, I guess. Do we, does it add anything other than to like, oh, okay, that was just like a little fun little bit? That was,
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was definitely a fun little bit, but it kind of made sense that they were able to ultimately outsmart him. I think when you have the whole team of them working together, it makes sense that they were able to outsmart Con Man. So I thought it was interesting, and I don't know, I'm not entirely convinced we won't see him again in Star Trek Discovery. I'm pretty sure that the anger that Mudd already had for Lorca, it's not gonna subside.
No.
Because like now he's got Stella and her father to deal with. I'm pretty sure that they had fun with having Rainn Wilson on the show, and look, I enjoyed watching him. I mean, we talked about it the last show actually, that it's a different interpretation of the character, but in the core, he is still representing Harry Mudd, and I thought that I don't know. I think it's good. I'd be stunned if we didn't see him again. Probably not this season, but I think we'll see him
no,
again.
I mean, he killed him
Probably.
53 times, and he said he wasn't tired of it yet. So.
Yeah.
That's true.
Oh, I think you did start saying he was getting tired of gloating, though.
He's getting tired of gloating, but
Not
like the
tired of
killing him
killing
is
Lorca,
fun,
yeah.
and he's like, I can't believe I'm not going to get to do it again.
Yeah.
So then we sort of tie that up, and there's a moment where Burnham confesses to Tyler that Stamets told me that we danced in one of these, and she's like, I can't imagine that I liked the dancing. So that goes back to just how interpersonally awkward she is, and that kind of resets us basically right to where we were at the beginning of the episode, and that's kind of what I was referencing, that it's fun that we know where this could go, but it might not. So I don't know. I found that part to be kind of interesting. She talks about, it's very complicated and strange, which, go figure, that's what love is. And Tyler says he isn't going anymore, so we'll keep an eye on all of that. Any overall thoughts before we touch briefly on the preview for next week, which very briefly we'll touch on?
Well, two. One is
Yeah.
it's always interesting when you see like a party thrown in the future and there's music.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm glad you called back to the fact that we
Yes.
started off with Staying Alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, because
music choice was
in
interesting.
First Contact, Zefram Cochrane shows up, and Roy Orbison's on the jukebox. It's like, okay, but here's the thing too. I think that works because when you have future music that has been created by people today, you're like, I don't think that's what they're going to listen to in the future. It would be, because I think there's some of that in the movie Her. There's like that weird future that they're in, and then like, this is music that people listen to, and I'm like, no, it's not. No, no one's listening to that. It's I don't know. It's like video game music. Basically.
I kind of like their weird beer pong, though.
Yeah, that's true.
That looked cool. I was like, oh, we could try that today.
Which maybe for, the season finale, we'll do that right here on this table. We'll play that beer pong, And, yeah, we will do a recreation of that party. Oh, my God, what a great Halloween party that would be. That's right. Not enough time to put it together.
Darn.
But
my second thing was the just Lorca's moves, both in episode 6 and 7, just the way he's really engendering loyalty from, like, Nash, from Burnham, just by what he's done. Certainly, I mean, using Sarek's rescue mission to kind of bring Burnham in closer.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Like, that's why it was important to him, because he needs to have his tight-knit group of people. And I think we're going to see that in the next couple episodes. And I won't go too deep into what we see in the preview for next week, but it seems fairly clear that it's a Saru-centric episode, which I'm glad to see because he's an interesting character. But also, one of the things that we've talked about on the show that we were concerned about is it was basically going to be the Michael Burnham show. And I'm glad to see that we've already saw that this week, and we've seen flashes of it here and there, that it does not seem to be that that's what we're going to get. Like, I'm sure, she's going to factor into it plenty. But the idea that it's mostly going to be about him and focusing on him, I welcome that because I sure want to know a lot more about him, right?
Oh, totally agree. I want to know more because it's like we know a little bit and it's enough to pique your curiosity, and so yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah, because most of what we've seen is just him in reaction to Burnham, what she's done, his feelings about her being around him. So to see something that's going to be driving where it's just him not worrying about how he's playing off of Burnham would be nice to see. But I mean, we still, no matter what, even though it's going to get like more of a Saru-focused episode, they're just in episode 6 where he's with Nash saying, as they're about to head off to rescue Sarek, to make sure that Burnham comes back in one piece or don't bother coming back at all. So no matter what, by the end of the season, it's going to be like she seems critical to whatever he wants to achieve by the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think that we'll see a lot more of that over the next couple weeks. But look, we're all caught up now, so now we're up to episode 7. Next week we have episode 8. Week after we have episode 9, and then there's a break in the season. So we're caught up for just a couple weeks. And then we'll talk about plenty of fun Star Trek-related things, and we can make sure to address some of the issues of Star Trek Discovery. We'll still talk about it, but we'll talk about Star Trek as a whole in the weeks during the hiatus. So we will still be around, but we will be back next Sunday at 10 Pacific, which means Eastern will be back at Monday at 1 a.m. Stay up, please. You need to make sure you stay with us. But for Frank Moran, where can they find you?
Happy Go Jackie.
Kari, where can they find you?
You can find me online at Kari D. Lane. That's Karidlane.
And you can find us both tomorrow night, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. Got my time zones confused. For Marvel TV Weekly. I'm still not sure what we're talking about yet. But we will be talking about Marvel TV Weekly over there. I'm Christian Bladt at ChristianDMZ. And thanks to everyone in the chat. Thanks to everybody that watched. And you're welcome, everyone who told us that we needed to catch up so that they could, kind of vent on these episodes right afterwards. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. All right, happy Halloween.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.